The focus of today's module will be on understanding what ATP is, how we use it in the cell to generate energy and perform work and power, and then we'll focus on two pathways that are able to generate ATP in the phosphocreatine system and glycolysis. So what do you need to know today? So the objectives in this section on metabolism are to understand the production of energy from ATP, and we'll also go from the reverse of understanding the energy needing to be put into a molecule to create ATP. Next, we'll need to know the positive and negative effects of the two systems of ATP production that we're going to cover in this module, and then we'll talk about the exercise adaptations to each of these. So what is ATP? ATP is the most important energy system in the cell. Without ATP, our cells would die relatively quickly. I think the common nomenclature that gets thrown around it is the energy currency of a cell, and you'll hear me probably reference that a few times, especially in the lab as well. And what we do is essentially we harness the energy found in the bonds of ATP. So we harness the energy found in these bonds here in order to complete a reaction. So when we talk about that energy needed for in the last module in order for a reaction to take place, a lot of times if that energy is high, we need some type of energy input, and we use that by breaking down ATP using the energy stored in these bonds. So if we start from the beginning, one is to get ATP, we need energy input in order to form the bond. So we can take adenosine diphosphate, which we'll go through next, and inorganic phosphate together to make adenosine triphosphate. So we'll look briefly at the structure here of ATP. ATP is made of an adenine ring, a ribose sugar, and then 3 phosphates. So phosphate 1, phosphate 2, and phosphate 3. Hence the adenosine tri, as in 3 phosphate. Okay. So we can do several different processes in order to harness this, but ultimately we use aerobic and anaerobic metabolism as the energy providers to form this bond. So we use metabolism to make ATP, and then ATP then goes and uses that energy stored to produce all the reactions in the body that require energy input, which is a lot, and I would say almost all of them. So when we break down ATP, so when we break down ATP, we can break it down into several steps. So the first is the idea that we have our high energy bond. Again, here's our backbone, adenosine, and our ribose sugar. Our 3 phosphates, which is 1, 2, 3. Again, 3 means, or 3 can be called adenosine triphosphate. Here we have 2, where 2 stands for di. And here we have AMP, where mono stands for 1. Very similar to our sugars that we talked about in the previous model of disaccharides and monosaccharides. So we have 1 phosphate group here, 2 phosphate groups here, and 3 here, tri, di, and mono. Right. So the way that we can then break these down is we can use hydrolysis, which is essentially the addition of water to break this high energy bond. This creates an energy that we can then store up and results in an ADP. We can further break that ADP down and get energy out of that by breaking it into AMP. So one of the things that this book really doesn't touch on at all is the idea of what happens to ADP. Right? So ADP has a couple of options. One is we can then go in this reverse order, right? So we can take ADP, we can add an inorganic phosphate back to it. One of the systems that we're going to look at today does exactly this, and we can make ATP back again. However, there are some really important signaling features of AMP, and if we look at skeletal muscle in papers, we can actually measure an increase in AMP. And so one of your assignments for this section is to use your Google Fu abilities. Go online, just do some research, look up what types of reactions do we have that cause ADP to be broken into AMP. Again, this isn't something that you're going to find in the book. You're going to have to go out, do some independent research, and look it up, and then you'll go and you'll post on the discussion board what you found and kind of break it down. All right, so if we look at all these, and how do we then use ATP and make ATP and work them all together? So again, this is why we talked about this last week, is the idea of a coupled reaction, right? So first we couple an exergonic reaction by taking food and converting food then into ATP. So we're again coupling the ADP with an inorganic phosphate, adding energy, that energy coming from food. So we're going to break this food down and then feed it through our anaerobic or our aerobic metabolism systems, providing that energy. That energy is then coupled to ADP and an inorganic phosphate and creating ATP. That ATP is now exergonic in nature, right? And we can then use that to go and produce many of the numerous reactions inside the body that require ATP production. So one of the ones that we've already talked about would be the sodium-potassium pump. This is a sodium-potassium pump. Each time it pumps 3 sodiums out and 2 potassiums in during an action potential in a nerve or muscle. It requires ATP to do that for each of those. And so the way that that protein works is that it uses the energy stored in the ATP bonds in order to shuttle ions in and out of the cell. And here's another way to look at it. So again, we have our exergonic, which is yielding energy, and our endergonic, which is needing energy. This is out of your book, and I think this is a pretty good figure to kind of wrap it all together, right? So we can needing energy in order to convert ADP back into ATP, right? And where does this energy come from? Again, this comes from aerobic and anaerobic metabolism, and we use food to break these down and pass essentially carbs, fats, and proteins in through anaerobic and aerobic metabolism to convert ADP back to ATP. Right? And then we can also yield energy. Again, exactly same idea. ADP, we get an energy. Inorganic phosphate is broken off by kind of storing this energy up in this bond. And then one other thing I want to highlight in this slide is the idea that when we break down ATP, we also produce a hydrogen ion. The book speaks pretty good to this, and I like this thought, is the idea that this is part of the reason that we see an increase in acidity in the muscle, aka pH goes down. Normal pH is about 7.4 in muscle, and we'll actually it's not uncommon to see during really intense exercise to creep down right around 7. So again, hydrogen ions are acidic. If you remember, basic ions are an OH, acid are H pluses. So when we break down, we get an increase in acidity in the muscle when we need ATP at really rapid rates. And again, rapid rates aren't going to be at rest. So yes, while we're slowly moving around and we're breaking down ATP in our sodium potassium pumps and in general some muscle contractions, our body has plenty of ability to maintain acid-base balance by buffering. We'll go specifically into that. But as we exercise more and more and break down lots and lots of ATP with cross-bridge cycling, then we'll see a change in acidity as one of those. So that ends the lecture here for ATP. The next lecture we're going to talk about the phosphocreatine system, which is going to be the fastest ATP generating process.